So today I'm going to be exploring whether it's possible to buy a cash flow positive property in Cape Town. If you've been following my podcast, you would know that I am an advocate for capital appreciating properties. And I regard that as the best possible investment you can make in property. But I've also stated before that you cannot ignore the cash flow positive properties or more cash flow orientated properties. And then also how I would use them in my personal portfolio at a later point in time when I'm trying to create more of an annuity income rather than building a portfolio through capital appreciation. So today I'm going to try and look at, well, if at some point in time I do decide to sell some of my capital appreciating assets and move them into cash flow positive properties, how would I go about doing that? Where would I start? And what would those options look like? So first off, finding cash flow positive properties in Cape Town that are positive from day one is probably going to be very hard. So we're going to look at how you can get as close as possible to that from day one. Yes, there are ways of manipulating rental income by doing short-term lets or by doing multi-lets or redeveloping the property, but I'm not going to be looking at those sort of things where you are adding value or where you become more intensively involved in the investment. I'm going to be looking at purely passive investments and something where you could still get as close as possible to a cash flow position from day one. So if you've tuned in for the first time or you're not familiar with what a cash flow positive property is, that is a property that covers its costs from day one. So where the rental income typically exceeds the mortgage installment. Now, the best case scenario would be that rental income actually covers the mortgage installment and all the associated costs. So to get into that market, typically, you need to be in areas where there's lackluster demand for property ownership, but there is strong housing demand for housing. So what do I mean by that? An area where your rental market is typically stronger than your buying power. In Cape Town, unfortunately, that is not the case. So that's why we find it very hard to find cash flow positive properties in Cape Town. However, because we have strong demand, we have strong capital growth. In today's example, I'm going to be using a property that's priced at about 750,000 Rand. This is a project that we've been working on for the last 4 years, and we've been selling in this area quite extensively, not just in this particular estate, but in the surrounding areas too. Even though these properties might be at the more affordable spectrum of the market, remember that they are still within the greater Cape Town area and are still, sort of exposed to the macroeconomic environments in Cape Town. So, in other parts of the country, they might be seen as areas that have no capital growth or very little capital growth, whereas in reality, in our areas, we're still seeing 4.5% to 5% annual capital growth. Now, this would be some of the lowest capital growth areas in Cape Town. But comparing it to the rest of the country, it might be, sort of the average in other areas, and even outperforming certain provinces. Why do I mention this? Because there is a direct correlation between rental return and capital growth. Properties that have strong capital growth usually have a lower rental return, whereas properties that have a good rental return typically have a lower capital appreciation rate. So this would probably be closer to something that you would find in other parts of the country, but you would still have a capital growth that just about matches inflation. So before we jump into the figures, let's have a look at what this typical property would look like. Okay, the area that I'm talking about is Belladonna Estate. For those of you who don't know Cape Town, this sits just to the south of Kuilsrivier in a suburb known as Blue Downs. It is a more affordable product in the Cape Town market. So what could you expect for 750,000 Rand, a 2-bedroom house? These are some of the images of some of the properties in the area. We can go over to one of the listings that we currently have for sale in that area and take a look through. This is a semi-detached unit for 749,000 Rand. They've got a very basic kitchen, living area, and 2 bedrooms with 1 shared bathroom. The nice thing about using this project is that over the last 4 years, since we've been selling, every single house that we have sold was fully tenanted at the time of us listing it, because we did the sale on behalf of a corporate fund. So we've got all those rental figures, all those rental incomes. We can see exactly how much rent every client has been paying. whether they've been paying, whether there were any defaults. So we've got a very good understanding of this market. We've sold in excess of 100 properties in this estate alone. Now, let's move on to some of the figures. As I say, we've been selling here for more than 4 years, having sold, I think, close on 120 houses. We've got very good information that we can use and can prove. So we know that if you buy a property of 749,000 Rand, you should be getting a rental income of 6,500 Rand. If you take the full bond on the property over a 30-year period with a 10.5% interest rate, your mortgage installment is going to be 6,851 Rand. Rental income, 6,500 Rand with an operating expense of about 768 Rand on these properties, giving you a net rental income of 5,732. This is a monthly shortfall of just over 1,000 Rand a month, and you'll have that for the first 4 years. If you project forward to month 48, that is the point where your rental income actually starts exceeding your expenses. Now, remember, prior to this, you are actually already in a position where your rental income is covering your costs, because you need to look at what the interest portion is on your loan, as well as your operating costs, because that's the true cost. The capital component that you're repaying, that's simply moving of your own capital. But for this exercise, let's try and look at when the rental income, net rental income, fully covers the cost of the property. That's going to be at about the end of year 4. And as I've said, at that point, you've contributed about 30,000 Rand out of your own pocket. Going even further forward, at what point in time will that 30,000 Rand be a cumulative surplus again, meaning that the property has effectively paid you back the 30,000 that you've contributed? That would be after about 88 months. So you get to a position where you've then recovered your money. There's been no account for time value of money, but that just sort of is something that I do enjoy looking at, is how long it's going to take to get the 30,000 Rand back. So you can say, well, Rowan, geez, this is going to take me 30 years to get to a point of having paid this property. And that is true if you simply make the minimum installment repayment. Remember, in year 1, we said you're contributing about 1,000 Rand over and above, 1,100 Rand over and above what the rental income is. Year 2, 800 Rand out of your pocket. Year 3, 470 Rand. And then year 4, about 120 Rand a month. Now, yes, if you then stop contributing from your side, and if you start taking the positive gains where the property is now in a positive cash flow position, if you start, taking that additional rental income and spending it elsewhere, yes, then it's going to take you 30 years. But if you pay that extra rental income that you're earning back into the bond, I've also looked at that scenario, how long it will then take you to have a fully paid off property. Okay, so just swinging back to the shortfall analysis here, you can see from month 49, I'm basically going to take that 250 Rand extra that I have, and I'm going to add that to my mortgage installment as a prepayment. So an additional top-up payment to my normal installment. So if for the first 48 months you're simply topping up, and then thereafter you start living out of the additional income that this property is generating, remember that the property is then going to take 30 years to repay. The alternative is that you start putting those extra rental income, you start putting into your mortgage bond, meaning you're making extra repayments over and above your minimum requirement. By doing this, you will actually shorten your loan term. I've also had a look at this exercise where we repay the additional operating income into the mortgage bond monthly to see what effect this has on my loan term. Here's some of the key details. So the out-of-pocket contribution peaks at 30,000 Rand, as we've said already, after about 48 months. And from this point in time, you start having surplus rental income. So from months 1 to 48, we're going to pay the fixed minimum installment of 6,851 Rand per month. But from month 49 onwards, we're paying the full net operating income monthly into the bond account. So in year 5, you're going to be paying 7,100 Rand. You can see that's about 300 Rand more, 250 to 300 Rand more than what you would have been paying in the prior months. And then it goes right up to about 16,000 Rand in year 20. So your original term of 30 years is then shortened by 14 years and 2 months and gives us the effective repayment term of only 15 years and 10 months. So while this is still a long time, 15 years to get to a point of the property having repaid itself, just remember that the only contributions up until this point in time would have been your initial shortfalls of 30,000 Rand, your transfer costs that you had at the beginning, and then any maintenance costs or vacancies that you would have had in during that period. Now we can add those up and we can estimate them and we can get to, sort of a round figure of 100,000 Rand or 150,000 Rand or 120,000 Rand. But this may be over a 15-year period of ownership. The point of today's exercise was simply looking at how close as possible can I get to a cash flow positive property by making a passive investment in Cape Town today. As I said at the start of this video, there are other ways that you can try and manipulate your returns by adding value to the property, converting it to a multi-let, going through a redevelopment exercise. But if we're looking at simply buying a passive investment with the idea of generating passive rental income in future, and getting as close as possible to cash flow positive in Cape Town today, while still experiencing some capital growth, this is probably going to be the closest you will get to that. Now, in my past videos, I've spoken about building a property portfolio using capital appreciating assets, and then at some later stage, maybe converting part of that into more income operating or income earning properties. This is a typical property that I would consider if I was in that phase of my portfolio building. At the moment, personally, I am looking at still investing in capital appreciating assets, but I'm also starting to consider some of these rental income generating where the rental return in comparison to the capital outlay is slightly better. This is a property that I would still be comfortable sacrificing my capital appreciation for rental return, because at least my capital growth is still at least matching or beating inflation. So I hope you found this episode useful. And while I don't believe you could get cash flow positive properties as a passive investment from day one in Cape Town, getting as close as 30,000 Rand out of pocket, I think, is as good as it's going to get. If you've liked this episode, please like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when our latest episodes go live. Thank you for supporting the channel, and we hope to give you more of this content going forward.